perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the start of our Thanksgiving week, and I think all of us are looking forward to Thanksgiving. No more than me, because this is one of those realities when you sit on a number of boards and you're working with a variety of different organizations, ministries, political campaigns, and others. Everybody, the week before the Thanksgiving week, tries to fill it with as much as possible. Now, I do have a political event tonight. But after that, it will actually settle down. Almost every night last week we had something. I think Wednesday was the only night we did not. Even Saturday night, that was the Texas Values Gala, which was a wonderful event. And, of course, I have some political things tonight. But it is amazing how much people try to get in just before Thanksgiving, knowing full well from Thanksgiving to about January 2nd, not much happens other than some Christmas parties. So it has been a busy couple of weeks, but you would have thought by now we would have settled all of the elections, and finally we have. Let's, if we can, talk about a few things happening. I'll focus first on Florida. Then, if we have time in this segment, I'll go to Georgia. We now can officially say that Rick Scott, who is the former governor, is now going to be the incoming senator-elect, and that Ron DeSantis will be the governor. Whew, that took a while, didn't it? And we'll talk about why that is the case, because not only do we have Senator Bill Nelson not returning to his job, but you also have the election supervisor, Brenda Snipes, not returning to hers as well. We'll talk about what that means in just a minute. And again, I recognize that a lot of you don't live in Florida, but you might want to pay attention to this, because what is happening there could happen even in the state where you are located. So let's talk about this. Guy Benson puts it in this way. He says there were a couple of questions about Florida. First, would the country's most populous and diverse presidential battleground state be governed by an ethically challenged borderline socialist for the next 4 years, or by an enthusiastic ally of president's re-election campaign? Now, what he means by that is the most populous and diverse. Obviously, we have more populous states, New York, California, Texas. But in terms of the battleground state, it is the most populous of the battleground states, because it is a purple state. And, of course, some people are saying that even in 2 years, Texas could be a purple state. So let's learn some lessons from that as well. Second, he wanted to also say that we look at this, would it be possible that Republicans could knock off a fourth Senate Democratic incumbent, each of whom voted against Justice Kavanaugh, and thus consolidate the control of Congress's upper chamber? The argument that Guy Benson's making, and I think we could make it as well, is voting against Judge Kavanaugh did not help you in red states or even purple states, and so that's kind of intriguing there as well. As a matter of fact, let me jump ahead and just while we're talking about the Senate, say that Mitch McConnell used to have a 51-49 majority. Now it looks like we'll have a 53-47 majority. Again, you have to leave the question mark to Mississippi, which I think is kind of a done deal, but let's, acknowledge that there is, interestingly enough, a runoff in that particular case, because it's kind of one of those, if you will, a multiple candidate primaries and then general election. So that's where it worked out. But this will make it much easier, obviously, to confirm many of these justices and judges that will be coming down in the next 2 years. So something to think about there. Back to the point he made about this ethically challenged socialist, Andrew Gillum, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate for Florida, conceded to his Republican opponent, Ron DeSantis, on Saturday, ending that protracted fight. And if you might have joined us on Friday, you might know that Jerry Newcomb just kind of jumped the gun on that and said he conceded on Friday when really he had to wait a few more hours, but did concede on Saturday, and so that was over. The margin that everybody reports is 10,000 votes. But let's, if we can, maybe dig in a little bit and talk about some of the other issues here as well, because there were quite a number of votes that were actually gained by Rick Scott during the machine recount. And there are other ballots that probably were counted that shouldn't have been counted. But a win is a win, and yet I think it illustrates again that what was happening in Florida may have been done not so much because there was a conviction that indeed Bill Nelson could win, but rather maybe a run-through for what might happen 2 years from now if there is a close presidential election in Florida. And so as we wind down the Florida story, at least in terms of the governor's race and the Senate race, it is kind of intriguing because this is a piece of trivia, but I thought it was fun. The outgoing governor and now incoming Senator Rick Scott, he barely won Florida's gubernatorial election in 2010, prevailing by just a little over 1 percentage point. 4 years later, he won re-election by exactly 1 percentage point. And now he's been elected to the United States Senate by a fraction of 1 percentage point. Although for the first time he cracked the 50% statewide. And so I think it illustrates only so well that Florida is a very closely divided state. And I would make a prediction that sometime in the future, perhaps 2 years from now in a presidential election, we'll be watching Florida once again. Well, as I pointed out, Brenda Snipes is out. She wasn't voted out this time or removed from her post. She just decided to tender her resignation after a 15-year reign. And I think the time long past has come for her to leave. Even when they were doing the recount, if you can believe this, I'm not making this stuff up. First of all, Broward was late in their machine recount by a couple of minutes. I think maybe that was intentional. But the unofficial count was not accepted. So then they did what was called a hand recount. And if this isn't just like watching the Keystone Cops or something like this, there was a temporary stop that happened multiple times because lawyers from both campaigns watched and realized that the volunteers were counting the wrong ballots, if you can believe that. Anyway, some people might ask, and have been asking me lately, so here's the answer. How did this woman, Brenda Snipes, get in that position in the first place? Well, she was appointed as the supervisor of elections in 2003 by the former governor, that would be Jeb Bush, after he removed the previous elections supervisor for incompetence. Of course, Bush then became one of her greatest, if you will, critics. And then she was elected to a full term in 2004, reelected in 2008, 2012, 2016. Are you ready? This woman makes $178,000 every year as an election supervisor with that level of incompetence. I love what Matt Vespa says. Wait. She was appointed to this post after her predecessor was removed for being incompetent? Is there a pattern here? And let's not forget, of course, there are all sorts of serious allegations, and I'm hoping that even though she has stepped down, maybe to avoid any kind of scrutiny of her behavior, I still think that all sorts of allegations of fraud need to be investigated before we have another major election taking place. So anyway, Rick Scott in, Ron DeSantis in, and Brenda Snipes out. When we come back, I'll just talk briefly about Georgia, where we had the Democratic nominee not concede, but also acknowledge that there was no way forward for her to actually go and be the next governor. So we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Before we head to Thanksgiving dinners, I wanted to talk about the mass shooting in California. Although the shooting and the public reaction were similar, the venue was different and worthy of a mention. For months, pundits and candidates have talked about the need for common sense gun control measures. Whenever I use the term on radio, I inevitably get a caller asking me what these common sense measures might be. I explain that it's mostly a term developed from focus groups used so that you don't have to go into specifics. But I think you could say that the state of California has implemented most, if not all, of the measures gun control advocates desire. Don't take my word for it. Just look at the #1 rating the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence gives to California. It exceeds every other state in gun regulation. Obviously, it requires all gun sales to be processed through a licensed dealer who must do a background check. It bans most so-called assault weapons as well as .50 caliber rifles. It restricts the sale, transfer, manufacture, and possession of a large capacity ammunition magazine. It regulates gun shows. It imposes a 10-day waiting period. It gives local law enforcement discretion to deny a license to carry a concealed weapon. And it became the first jurisdiction in the nation to enact a gun violence restraining order. Actually, that's a partial list, but you get the idea. If there was ever a state that has implemented what advocates have called common sense gun laws, it is the state of California. Thus, the obvious question we should ask of people advocating more restrictive gun control is what additional laws could have prevented the shooting in the California bar? I can't think of any. Sadly, it's hard to prevent an evil or unbalanced person who wants to use a weapon to kill others. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Everyone's going to, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we broadcast on Facebook Live. If you would like to leave a comment there, certainly that would be appropriate. And I really probably took a little more time than I should have on that whole issue of Florida. But I've had people come up and say, how did this woman get her job? And what was she paid? And is she going to step down? And so I wanted to cover that. Real quickly, mention the issue of Georgia. Certainly there's some work that needs to be done in Florida, but Georgia is another kind of troublesome state, and it has to do with Stacey Abrams, who, of course, rose to prominence by running, in large part, this kind of massive voter registration drive. So what happened is that you had all these individuals registering to vote, and what it did was flood the office of the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp's office, with what probably could, I think, probably reasonably, in light of how we've seen these go before, some fraudulent registrations. Well, when he wanted, as the Secretary of State, to try to sort those out, then you heard cries of racism. Now, if you're not familiar with the Georgia governor's election, Brian Kemp was running against her. So this was a wonderful tactic to make him look like he was racist and really trying to prevent legitimate people from having a chance to vote for her. Well, anyway, that was kind of a narrative that she used. She launched a political action committee called Fight Fair Georgia, used that to wage a legal battle. And so as a result, that was something that then made her kind of the cause for the moment. And you had, of course, Oprah Winfrey and all sorts of people coming down. Well, she hasn't been able to get the requisite number of votes in the recount. And so on the weekend, she said, this is not a speech of concession. She said, in the coming days, we'll be filing a major federal lawsuit against the state of Georgia for the gross mismanagement of this election and to protect future elections from unconstitutional actions. Well, we'll see where this one goes, but now maybe you can understand why more recently Hillary Clinton, who's made it very clear she wants to run for the presidency again, said the other day that actually if this were a fair election in Georgia, Stacey Abrams would be the governor. So we're going to see a real ongoing battle here of what is taking place. And even though she did not concede, she also said there was no further viable remedy. So she said, trust in our democracy relies on believing that there are good actors who are making this happen. And Brian Kemp was a horrible actor who benefited from this, and that's problematic, and goes on. I won't go on and on and on. So what was so striking to me in her concession speech is at one point she made the point to understand that you have to understand that Stacey Abrams supports abortion on demand at basically any level. She made the point something being legal does not make it right. And I just always love people that will make that kind of pious statement when we would all, I think, that are pro-life agree that even though abortion is legal, that doesn't make it right. Here, she used it in the other case because it's legal for him doing what he did. So we're going to hear a lot about voter suppression and hear about the need for the integrity of the elections. And so I think we're going to still see these battles playing out in Georgia and in Florida, perhaps in some other states as well. So I just thought I'd give you that as a background for just a few minutes. And as we go to another topic, I wanted to, if nothing else, once again, encourage you to read widely and to be skeptical, especially when you see some headlines. This story came out the other day, and it's a good example of how when you see a bias on the part of reporters, in some cases it may be even the editor that actually posts the headline, you get something that is completely misleading. And that is, if you were to look at one of the headlines for CNN, and I'm also going to use the New York Times in just a minute, but CNN says House Ethics Committee chides Meadows and Kehoe over sexual harassment allegations. Now, if you were to see that, you would say that, okay, Mark Meadows, who is a Republican, part of the Freedom Caucus, and another individual, Reuben Kehoe, who's a Democrat, were both accused of sexual harassment. Not true. Now, if you dig into the story, you'll probably get at least a little bit of the answer, but it's a good illustration of why you should have a little bit of skepticism and discernment about this. Let's tell the story. First of all, let's deal with the Democrat, because that one is true, and that is the Democrat from Nevada, Reuben Kehoe, was rebuked by the House Ethics Committee for making, and this is their words, persistent and unwanted advances towards women who were required to interact with him on part of their professional responsibilities. So first of all, he was directly rebuked for sexual harassment-related offenses. The second person who I just mentioned is Republican Mark Meadows, Republican from North Carolina. He was reprimanded for failing to take prompt and decisive action for somebody in his office who had, in one way or another, been accused of engaging in some kind of sexual harassment. It was actually a former staff member, but nevertheless, you have, first of all, an individual who was directly sexually harassing individuals who was rebuked by the Ethics Committee. Then the second one was an individual that was rebuked because a now former staff member had sexually harassed female employees. I thought it was interesting to even listen to some other individuals that have worked with him. One of those is Alyssa Farah. In her tweet where she criticized this story, she said the headline is misleading, so let me clear it up. She said Republican Mark Meadows never sexually harassed anyone. His former staffer did. I know I am one of the women in the report. I respect the Ethics Committee, but my experience was that Mark Meadows had my back, took me at my word, and respected and protected me. So first of all, I get the sense she disagreed with the way in which the House Ethics Committee even criticized him. And more importantly, back to the key point, when you lump these two individuals together, If you aren't reading the article or paying attention, you think that one Democrat and one Republican were guilty of sexual harassment. One was guilty, that's the Democrat, of sexual harassment. The other one was simply criticized because he didn't take swift action, apparently, although Alyssa Farah seems to disagree with that. So again, I take you back to two headlines and tell me, were these fair? CNN's headline says, Health Ethics Committee chides Meadows and Kehouen over sexual harassment allegations. Well, again, it sounds to me, matter of fact, interestingly enough, let's look at the opening sentence. The Health Ethics Committee admonished 2 male lawmakers Friday related to investigations of alleged sexual harassment. You have to keep reading into the story to recognize that Mark Meadows actually did not harass anyone, and they actually name him first. Why? Well, because he's a conservative, he's a Republican, and CNN doesn't like him. Got it? How about New York Times? New York Times headline, Ethics Committee rebukes Mark Meadows over aide sexual misconduct. This headline doesn't even mention Reuben Kehouen's name, who's the one that actually did the sexual harassing, and instead it only talks about Mark Meadows. So again, you can say maybe the reporter got it right, and maybe the editor put his or her spin on it. That's a possibility. Maybe they took some other report that was biased and didn't really make a distinction between the two. But if you wonder why this president from time to time calls this fake news, there's a pretty good illustration of it, because you can see that if you were just looking at the headline of the New York Times, and I have New York Times on my phone and I check it out as well as anybody else. You can look on my phone and see Wall Street Journal, you can see Washington Post, you can see New York Times, and you can see these headlines popping up, and that headline pops up. And again, if you don't have the time, as oftentimes I don't, since I get hundreds and hundreds of emails every single day, all I see is Ethics Committee, Mark Meadows, sexual misconduct. And I would come to the natural conclusion, unless I read deeply into that, oh, well, there's one of those Republicans again, sexually harassing somebody. And you have to really work your way into the article to even begin to see the disclaimer that should have been in the headline. So again, I don't want to spend any more time on that other than just to say one of the things we want to try to do so often here at Point of View is encourage you to read a lot of these articles, have a little bit of skepticism sometimes when some kind of outrageous headline or argument is being made, and exercise some discernment. And here is a good example of how the New York Times and CNN completely convoluted and confounded the kind of information. And so as a result, we had Mark Meadows being linked with Reuben Kehouen. The Democrat was engaged in sexual harassment. Mark Meadows was not, but you wouldn't know that by reading either of those headlines or even reading the first sentence or two in the article. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
November is rushing by, and I'm sure your inbox, mailbox, and ears are already over capacity with screaming announcements for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. No matter how much you're planning to spend on items for your loved ones, don't forget to save something as a gift to the nation on what's come to be known as Giving Tuesday. Your support of Point of View helps unite people across this land from sea to shining sea. Yes, we face many troubling issues, and to put it mildly, we don't always agree. But Point of View believes we can disagree with respect, with honor, with patience, and a view to inform with truth that unites. You make that possible, and we urge you to give that gift to the nation through giving to Point of View. Take just a moment and give generously today at pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151. You can wait for Giving Tuesday, but even better, get a jump and give today with a gift that will truly keep on giving. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. On our website, one of the articles I've actually titled, Hunters Do Not Need to Apologize. The actual article is called Friends of Elmer. Now, what does that mean? Elmer Fudd. Now, if you're old enough to remember who Elmer Fudd is, then you already get it. If you're younger, go, I have no idea what you're talking about. We'll get into that in just a minute. But it's the idea of hunting, and it illustrates the remarkable chasm that is developing here in America. When I have been in Alaska, we have radio stations all the way at North Pole, Alaska. Or, of course, here in the state of Texas, we're broadcasting today, and some of you are listening up in Minnesota, a variety of other places where hunting takes place and is very significant. That is so foreign to a person that lives in New York City or a person that lives in San Francisco or L.A., can't even imagine. And it illustrates kind of the schism that is taking place and why Kevin Williamson decided to write about this was to remind us that when we talk about this idea of hunting, it's actually listed as brown bears, but they're popularly known as grizzly bears. So I'll say brown bear, but in many cases mean grizzly bears. This was something that has only been limited to Alaska. But now they're talking about making some of those changes. And what it is that the Trump administration has issued new guidelines which would permit the hunting of brown bears, popularly known as grizzly bears, including areas around Yellowstone National Park. And as you might imagine, there's a lawsuit by animal rights activists and anti-hunting ideologues who want to prevent that idea of a planned hunt. So far, so good. We'll follow that, see what happens to it. But it was interesting because Kevin Williamson spent some time saying, now, if you look at one of the outdoors magazines, one called Sports Afield, this is what they say. If by chance one of you have the chance to act on one of these handful of brown bear licenses that have been issued, and if you are successful, then for the sake of the hunting community, please don't say anything about it on social media, and please don't post any pictures. Now, that's not the only one. These other warnings have come out, as you are well aware. It used to be, by the way, I was just talking to somebody over the weekend, it's a hunter, and it said Point of View used to be across the street, actually, from the Safari Club. And he said, oh, yeah, I've been part of that. And, of course, again, some of those individuals that have gone to Africa and had a chance to shoot something, they have learned they probably don't want to post it. And, of course, there are certain animals where they get to dart them, which I didn't know. You know, you can like a dart a rhino and get a picture with them, but then the rhino eventually, the anesthesia wakes off and gets up and walks away. So nevertheless, the point is they're making all sorts of warnings like this to people in the so-called hunting community that, you know, you're not helping us by posting these pictures or posting that you even were engaged in the hunt. And so, again, Kevin Williamson puts it this way. He says, the problem with the line of argument is that dead animals are necessarily front and center when it comes to hunting. That is ultimately what hunting is about, and hunters should not apologize for that, he says. Hunting is one of the most ancient organized human undertakings. Hunting, and not the other thing, may well be the oldest profession. And whether one thinks of it as a sport or a ritual or simply a gathering of protein, it is part of an honorable tradition and a pursuit that can be, and at best, profound. But the point he's making then, it says a little bit later in the article, we live in an antiseptic world, and there's no cure for that quite like gutting a Texas feral hog or roasting a pheasant you shot yourself. And there's probably no single activity that measures the width of the cultural chasm between coastal, urban, progressive America and interior, rural, and traditional America. How this makes individuals that are writing books like What's the Matter with White People just crazy. He's actually referring to Joan Walsh, which I won't get into. So he goes on a little bit later and says, rural white guys are out of fashion just now. It's hard to blame hunters for being concerned about the optics, and he's not talking about the optics on your gun, but the kind that politicians are always going on about. It's easy to caricature hunters as bloody-minded Elmer Fudds, and there are those who want to drive them underground. Perhaps one day they'll be forced to obliquely refer to one another as Friends of Elmer, the way Alcoholics Anonymous call themselves Friends of Bill, and gay men used to call themselves Friends of Dorothy. That lawsuit was, after all, successful, and for the moment, brown bear hunting remains restricted to Alaska with its abundant population of Ursus arctos. Well, the recovery of the brown bear population in the lower 48 states is a great conservation success story, but as with the case of wolves in the West, it's not a success story without its trade-offs. As the bear population has grown, so have confrontations between bears and people, as well as bear attacks on livestock. Several brown bears have been killed in self-defense by hunters and game wardens, and some problem animals have been hunted down after repeatedly attacking livestock. In 2018, even grizzly bears are subject to rules of etiquette, which they violate at their peril. Then he goes on to say that the Yellowstone brown bear population is especially prone to aggressive interactions with humans, something toward which brown bears in general are not typically inclined. There is a couple of explanations for that. One is that because of the unique concentration of edible wildlife in the park, Yellowstone area bears have become much more meat-intensive diets, and as a result normally bring them into contact with hunters. Bears are happy to steal a kill from a hunter, and ranchers. Another is that the local bears, unlike their cousins in less traveled areas, simply spend more time around humans and are less startled by them. And the point he's making is that we may think of Yellowstone as nature. It really is not. I mean, to understand what nature is like, as I've mentioned many times on this program, spent time on a horseback and actually rode all the way through the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is in Montana, the largest wilderness area in the lower 48 states. It took an entire week to ride through this. And there you see what it's like, because there aren't any vehicles, there aren't any human beings, except those few on horseback. You know, after about an hour, the backpackers, you don't see them again because they don't backpack, 100 miles into any wilderness area like this. And so as a result, you can understand what it's like. Well, Yellowstone is managed basically for the people. And so as a result, it goes on to say that parks like Yellowstone and other wildlife areas around them require management, and the proposed hunt was to carefully be limited by the state authorities. A handful of bears would have been taken, with 13 hunters having been issued licenses. Wyoming would have permitted the harvest of a total of 9 boars and 1 sow in Yellowstone and Grand Teton areas, along with 12 more bears in the rest of the state. Idaho would have permitted the taking of a single bear. There are about 1,500 brown bears in the United States outside of Alaska. The proposed was very limited indeed and quite reasonable. But the point he's making is that we are starting to see a situation now where if you are a hunter, frankly, if you are a gun owner, you are on one side of a chasm that is getting wider and wider all the time. And so as a result, I think illustrates only so well how we are beginning to have all sorts of people bringing kinds of lawsuits and reacting to the idea of hunting down bears or wolves or other things. But when we don't bring them back to some kind of carrying capacity, you're going to have some real problems. He reminds us that parts of our West are still pretty wild, and the people live and love those places are keenly aware of their duties of stewardship. We want those places to be full of wolves and bears, pronghorn, mule deer, and the rest. The people in Moffat County, Colorado, sometimes joke that their population is about 60,000, 50,000 of which are elk. Colorado has about 280,000 of them, and on the other side of the country, Maine issues 10,000 hunting permits for black bears every year, and the population continues to grow. 3/4 of the hunters going after black bears in Maine go home empty-handed. Bear hunting isn't easy. And Nevada's desert bighorn sheep population continues to grow, with conservation efforts funded in part by the very expensive tags required to hunt them. And even the bison, a great tragedy of the commons, is making a comeback. Ted Turner may have some pretty dumb political ideas, but give the man credit for putting his money where his mouth is on those. And so again, if we want to have any kind of management of these wildlife, it seems to me that hunting is one very significant way to do that. and as a result, it is a time-honored tradition. But if nothing else, I just thought it would be worth, for those of you that are hunters out there, or maybe married to hunters, or at least know people that are hunters, this article by Kevin Williamson, which appeared in National Review, called Friends of Elmer. That's Elmer Fudd before you. Or I titled it, Hunters Don't Need to Apologize, illustrates one of those cultural battlegrounds that is taking place. We don't talk about too often, but I thought we might mention it today here on Point of View. We come back, I want to talk about the fact that there's a school that has decided that since Ben Carson is in the Trump administration, they want to remove his name from a school named in his honor. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Each week I get an email with a list of cases about prisoners asserting their right to the free exercise of religion. I find it fascinating that even in jail we protect religious liberty. Here's just a sampling of the cases I see each week. In Nunez v. Wirtz, a Pennsylvania federal court allowed a complaint by a Muslim inmate to move forward after his complaint asserted that he had been denied the right to wear his pant legs rolled up, except during his religious services. In Illinois, a federal court allowed an inmate to move forward with his assertion that the prison was not providing him with a diet consistent with his Native American religious beliefs. In Gambino v. Payne, a magistrate recommended dismissing the case of an inmate converting to Judaism. Apparently, the free exercise clause was not sufficient to protect against his complaint of inadequate privacy in the showers. Finally, a Catholic inmate in California is allowed to amend his complaint, but the court dismissed his original complaint. Evidently, the court was not inclined to let him leave confinement to attend a funeral. Some cases appear to have less merit than others. Inmates sometimes have little else to do but file lawsuits. Nonetheless, judges take complaints of the denial of religious liberty seriously, even if that denial comes from a jail cell. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the people we've enjoyed having on the program over the years is Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson, who, of course, has also now joined the Trump cabinet, but we've interviewed him before he ran for office. We interviewed him when he was running for the presidency, and, of course, we have not had much of an opportunity to interview him since he has been on the cabinet, and that's understandable, but certainly have gotten to know him and his wife, been at events with them. If you come to our studio, you see a picture even taken with him and his wife. Just a genuinely nice individual and an incredible success story. So I thought it would be worth just a mention of the fact that there are now calls for people to remove his name from one of the schools in Detroit that has, it's called the Ben Carson School. Now, you got to understand that he has been so successful. He was a graduate of the Detroit school system, went on to become a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon, operating on unborn children, operating on conjoined twins, so-called Siamese twins. We now call them conjoined twins. Certainly an author of a number of outstanding books, an individual that has established a scholarship program for other African-American young people, but now a member of the Detroit School Board has demanded that they remove his name from the schools and never put his name on anything associated with Detroit. Lamar Lemons, writing in the Washington Post, said, "It's synonymous with putting Trump's name on our school in blackface." Tell me what you really think about. And so he's calling for someone to pry the letters off the high school that bears Carson's name. He also says that Ben Carson is doing Trump's bidding and has adversely affected the African-American community in Detroit, as well as the nation with his housing policies. By the way, I'll disagree, and I'll give you some counter re-arguments to that from some people that are African-American leaders who actually say he's actually doing a good job. And he's alienated himself with a president that says he is a white nationalist and sends dog whistles that even the deaf can hear. First of all, at least be honest. Donald Trump has never called himself a white nationalist, and I get a little weary of the so-called dog whistles. But nevertheless, when I first saw that, I thought, should I cover it? And I thought, maybe not. It's just one of those stories you get out there. But we have some friends that are, of course, with what's called Project 21. It's a black leadership network. And they took issue with this. So let me, for just a minute, quote from a few individuals. Gregory Parker, for example, is a former county commissioner in Texas, African-American. And this is what he had to say. "This is another misguided effort by liberals to erase history. The Detroit School Board had no problem with the name of the school before Dr. Carson became active in politics. Now that he does not conform to their ideal liberal plantation image of a black man, and he plays a prominent role in the Trump administration, he offends their hypersensitive, self-righteous, and morally corrupt sensibilities." Again, the hyperbole on all sides of this is just off the charts. But anyway, he goes on in another part of this press release to say, "Dr. Carson's accomplishments and successes as a surgeon and advocate for getting good education do not change because he works for this president. His accomplishments will forever serve as a testament to courage and strength of all people, black and white." Okay, let's hear from some others. Another member, Nadra Enzi, she's a public safety activist in New Orleans, African-American as well, with Project 21, a black leadership network, said, "If Ben Carson's projects to presidential appointee name isn't worthy to remain on a Detroit school, it proves why his hometown is a self-inflicted wasteland." And so, again, the attempt is to rename the Dr. Benjamin Carson High School of Science and Medicine. And so, as a result, we'll see where that goes. The vote at the time was 6-1 to consider renaming it. That doesn't mean it has been, but you can kind of see where that might take us. And just one more, just before we run out of time here. Dr. Ben Carson, first of all, let me give you this quote. This is from Jesse Lee Peterson. He's been on the program with us many times before. And he says, "By all accounts, Dr. Ben Carson is an honorable man." Jesse Lee Peterson says he overcame a lot in life, lacking the guidance of a father. His single mother maintained a sense of responsibility and taught him to work hard. He became a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon operating on unborn children and separating conjoined twins. He famously told the truth about the bad policies of a sitting president, Barack Obama, in his presence. You might remember that was at the prayer breakfast. He ran for president, contending with Donald Trump and 15 Republican politicians. So Jesse Lee Peterson says today, Dr. Ben Carson heads the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the Trump administration. Elitist blacks and liberals were dismayed that a man with common sense took the helm of this department instead of another far-left socialist. And then Jesse Lee Peterson points out that under Obama, the Housing and Urban Development Department redistributed low-income blacks out of their ghettos into safe white neighborhoods in order to give blacks an opportunity. This policy only spread crime and decay because blacks getting their ghetto nature with them. They don't develop the character required for successful and peaceful lives. They don't work, marry, or build lives. And so as a result, Jesse Lee Peterson, very concerned about this because, after all, these are individuals that are criticizing him for trying to move people out of the housing projects into meaningful life. The argument that Ben Carson and others have made is you don't measure the compassion of the government by how many people are on the welfare rolls. You should measure compassion by how many people get off of the welfare rolls and get a meaningful job. You don't measure compassion by how many people are in government housing. You measure compassion by how many people you get out of subsidized government housing so that they could own their own homes. But finally, Jesse Lee Peterson says now a good black man, Ben Carson, is aligned with a good white man, President Trump. Liberals are having a hissy fit. President Trump truly loves black people, so says Jesse Lee Peterson, with no fear of telling the truth. And, of course, he's bringing back jobs, fighting the unending flow of illegal aliens, cutting regulations and taxes to create a business-friendly environment. And as a result, the argument that at least Jesse Lee Peterson is making, and some of the people from Project 21, is that if we really want to help the black community, let's actually implement policies that have provided what? The lowest unemployment ever for Hispanic American, African American individuals, and maybe that's the better way to pursue a compassionate policy that will help African Americans as well as other minorities. But it does look like, unless this vote is turned around, and I don't think it's going to, that according to the latest vote, the district, and this would be the Detroit Public Schools Community District Board of Education, is now wanting to remove the name Dr. Benjamin Carson High School of Science and Medicine. And so as a result, that is probably going to take place. And I'm sorry for Dr. Ben Carson, and I'm sorry for the students who I think in the past would have looked to him as an outstanding role model, an individual that, as we pointed out, graduated from the Detroit school system in 1969 from a single mom, went on to get a medical degree and became a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon. But I'm afraid that school will no longer have his name on it if the actions that have been taken just recently are fulfilled. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we've got some other topics to address. We are going to talk about this issue of plagiarism. Warren Throckmorton has written a very good article that we have posted. Does plagiarism matter to Christians? And we'll also have Mary DeMuth with us. She has written about this as well as an author, very concerned about it. So we're going to focus on this issue of plagiarism. And again, the need for you to know about an issue that I have been following for some time and thought this would be a good topic to address during this Thanksgiving week. We'll be back right after this.
November is rushing by, and I'm sure your inbox, mailbox, and ears are already over capacity with screaming announcements for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. No matter how much you're planning to spend on items for your loved ones, don't forget to save something as a gift to the nation on what's come to be known as Giving Tuesday. Your support of Point of View helps unite people across this land from sea to shining sea. Yes, we face many troubling issues, and to put it mildly, we don't always agree. But Point of View believes we can disagree with respect, with honor, with patience, and a view to inform with truth that unites. You make that possible, and we urge you to give that gift to the nation through giving to Point of View. Take just a moment and give generously today at pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151. You can wait for Giving Tuesday, but even better, get a jump and give today with a gift that will truly keep on giving. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our Thanksgiving week, and so we're going to be covering a number of different issues, and especially one that I've kind of postponed till now, and that is the subject of plagiarism. Might also get into the issue of ghostwriting and a couple of other things, but let me just give you an update. We would have thought weeks ago that we would have been talking about the final conclusion of the elections of 2018, but only to the end of the weekend here do we have that now. And first of all, of course, to those of you in the state of Florida, recognize that the former governor, now Senator-elect Rick Scott, has indeed been elected. And so that is significant, defeating the incumbent Senator Bill Nelson, who was elected 18 years ago. And so, by the way, I might just mention that he's not the only person not returning to his job. We also will talk about in just a minute Brenda Snipes, who has been the Broward County election supervisor, who decided to resign, and we'll talk about that. But also, while we're talking about the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis is now going to be the next governor of that state, defeating Andrew Gillum. And for our listeners there in Georgia, Stacey Abrams really didn't give a concession speech. It was sort of a non-concession speech, but at least an understanding that going forward, there is no path other than the lawsuit that she's going to bring. So Brian Kemp, who has been the Secretary of State, will now be the governor in the state of Georgia. And we can talk a lot more about that a little bit later if you'd like to do so. But let me just give you an update on Brenda Snipes, an individual, interestingly enough, that was appointed as the supervisor of elections back in 2003 by the former governor, Jeb Bush. Was interesting enough, the previous individual was removed for election incompetence. And some people said, what? You mean the previous one was removed because of incompetence? This one seemed to be the same case, even over the manual recount. Which, first of all, the mandatory machine recount was turned in late, and so then they had the manual recount, and in day two of the hand recount, there were times when lawyers from both campaigns were stopping the volunteers because they were counting the wrong ballots. And so, nevertheless, Brenda Snipes has stepped down, although I think there was going to be investigations, maybe step down so that maybe those investigations won't be quite as far-ranging. So that's just an update there. I think we finally come to the end of election 2018, and this is just coming to the end of that long process just a few days before Thanksgiving. So, nevertheless, wanted to give you that update, and we're going to focus some time and attention, some needed time and attention on this issue of plagiarism. Very good article written by Dr. Warren Throckmorton, which we've posted on our website. Does plagiarism matter to Christians? Dr. Warren Throckmorton is the professor of psychology at Grove City College, an individual who received his Ph.D. from Ohio University. He, along with Michael Coulter, authored the book Getting Jefferson Right, Fact-Checking Claims About Our Third President. He, along with Regent University professor Mark Yarhouse, who, by the way, I think used to be at one time at Wheaton, has developed sexual identity therapy. Dr. Throckmorton has also been the president of the American Association of Mental Health Counselors Association and joins us now by phone. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Also with us is our good friend Mary DeMuth, oftentimes in studio with us, an author of more than 30 books. Of course, we have certainly had her wonderful testimony over the years of how she has been able to really be an encouragement to other individuals, even in the midst of the brokenness of her life. And Mary, I know this is an issue dear to your heart as well, so thank you for joining me as well.
So great to be on. Thanks, Kerby.
Okay, Dr. Throckmorton, let's get into this issue because I wanted people to recognize that this is not just an isolated case. Your 3-page article that we've posted, and I've read other posts and Twitter posts as well, this seems to be a real issue, whether we are talking about Tim Clinton, whether we're talking about Mark Driscoll, whether we're talking about a variety of other individuals. It seems to me that this seems to be almost an epidemic of plagiarism in the area of Christian publishing. So you've investigated this. What have you found?
Well, that's right. There does seem to be quite a number of cases where popular authors of Christian books have borrowed material from other authors and without proper sourcing. It's hard to know what their motivation is all the time, but when you look at the material that they've taken, it looks to me that either they've deliberately taken the material or they've relied on other people, researchers or ghostwriters, others, to do the research, put the material together, and then they put their name on it. So, and you mentioned this, I think, in your opening, that you might look at ghostwriting. I think one of the issues that I've come back to again and again, looking at these problems, is that it seems like there's an awful lot of there are quite a few books that come out that the authors, at least the person with the name on the book, isn't really certain what's in the book because maybe that person didn't do it.
As a person that interviews authors, and I've been fortunate over the years to interview mostly the authors, but Marlon Maddox, who was the host of the show before, of course, he went on to be with the Lord, and of course this program's been on since 1972, and it was been up on satellite since about 1982. Marlon used to every once in a while, after an interview, come back and say, well, that was a great book. Someday I really want to interview the author, because it was obvious that they did not know what was in the book that had their name on it. Mary, you're laughing, but I know watching you, I follow you on Twitter, I follow you on Instagram. Of course, you and I are friends. We've been at different writing conferences. You've been in the studio many times with us before. I know this is a real concern to you. Share a little bit of that with our authors and with our listeners.
Definitely. I feel like it is a scar upon Christian writing and, academic writing and all sorts of it. Isn't just isolated to Christian publishing. It's all over the place. But it just makes everyone question whether or not those who genuinely write their books and do good citing, whether they're legit or not. And it's a problem. Plus, it points to a deeper issue. And I think Warren would agree with me that this is an issue of Christian celebrity most often. And yes, we have this problem of these celebrities not having enough time to write their own books, but because they're a celebrity, they are contracted to write books, and so they either take from someone else blatantly, as Warren said, or they hire ghostwriters who do the exact same thing, and then they really truly have no idea what's in their books. And that, to me, seems like lying. I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me, but I think Warren would also agree with me, too, that it is shocking that no one seems to be bothered by it. And that bothers me, too.
Yes. Well, let me take a break, and when we come back, that's what I wanted to get into, because there are consequences to plagiarism. A while back, I had a chance to interview an individual who was very honest about the fact that he lost his job in the Bush White House because someone caught him engaged in plagiarism. Near the end of the article by Dr. Warren Throckmorton, he talks about individuals in the newsroom that have lost their jobs, in academia that have as well. But when it comes to plagiarism in the Christian community, we don't seem to be very concerned. Well, I am, and I know you guys are, and I suspect many of our listeners are. So that's why we're talking about it today here on Point of View. We'll continue that conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Before we head to Thanksgiving dinners, I wanted to talk about the mass shooting in California. Although the shooting and the public reaction were similar, the venue was different and worthy of a mention. For months, pundits and candidates have talked about the need for common sense gun control measures. Whenever I use the term on radio, I inevitably get a caller asking me what these common sense measures might be. I explain that it's mostly a term developed from focus groups used so that you don't have to go into specifics. But I think you could say that the state of California has implemented most, if not all, of the measures gun control advocates desire. Don't take my word for it. Just look at the #1 rating the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence gives to California. It exceeds every other state in gun regulation. Obviously, it requires all gun sales to be processed through a licensed dealer who must do a background check. It bans most so-called assault weapons as well as .50 caliber rifles. It restricts the sale, transfer, manufacture, and possession of a large capacity ammunition magazine. It regulates gun shows. It imposes a 10-day waiting period. It gives local law enforcement discretion to deny a license to carry a concealed weapon. And it became the first jurisdiction in the nation to enact a gun violence restraining order. Actually, that's a partial list, but you get the idea. If there was ever a state that has implemented what advocates have called common sense gun laws, it is the state of California. Thus, the obvious question we should ask of people advocating more restrictive gun control is what additional laws could have prevented the shooting in the California bar? I can't think of any. Sadly, it's hard to prevent an evil or unbalanced person who wants to use a weapon to kill others. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pleased to have with us today Mary DeMuth and Warren Throckmorton, and we have his article, Does Plagiarism Matter to Christians? First of all, I would encourage you to read that, but also there's a way in which you might want to post it on your Facebook page or Twitter account or something of that nature and start a conversation. And Warren, let me come to you for just a minute because I'm well aware of the issue with Mark Driscoll. He'd been on the program, and then shortly thereafter he was on with Janet Medford. I've been on with Janet Medford. We know each other. Matter of fact, ran into each other recently at an American Family Association event. And she was the one that discovered it and brought it up on the air, which I think was a little bit much. But you even point out that at the time was, did you have enough citation? But since then, you've discovered additional problems. And so what tends to happen is sometimes the publishers go, oh, okay, we got a problem here. And they quietly correct some of those. But sooner or later, we got the same kind of problem. And doesn't that come back to what Mary was talking about, kind of this celebrity culture that says, oh, well, he's a best-selling author, or, oh, he's the head of a mega church, so we're going to just kind of blink at that one and put out the next book without any kind of apology. What's your thoughts?
There's an awful lot of money that's at stake here. The advance for the Real Marriage book was somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000.
Wow!
And so that's a lot of money that the publishers have invested in their authors. And so if they can go the route of correcting the issues quietly, maybe without arousing too much media attention, too much public backlash, then that may be a way for them to go. And that's essentially what happened. There were quite a number of instances that I pointed out, and they did end up correcting most of them in the e-books that you can buy online, and in some of the published books. But those books that were back, the older books that aren't going to be printed very much, I don't know how many of those were actually ever corrected. But I think you're onto something there. When it's somebody who is a sellable property in a sense, it takes an awful lot of public backlash before something might happen.
Well, and Mary, let's just point out that those of us that write books don't see those kinds of checks. But again, it just illustrates that there's almost a two-tiered system. There are a good number of people that you and I speak to at Christian Writers Conferences, and if they're lucky to get a book published, they consider themselves really fortunate if they get an advance, which is the smallest amount they can give. But then there's that elite group that, because of this celebrity culture that you've been talking about, oftentimes doesn't actually have to be accountable. And that, I think, is going to perpetuate more of this, don't you think?
Well, definitely. I think that when you have that lack of oversight, and I will say that there are programs out there that publishers buy that they can run a piece through a checker to see if it can happen. Like if there is plagiarism going on, it's not 100%. And so I think one of the things that they could do, just to kind of circumvent the question, and then I'll answer it, but is to just keep doing that. The problem comes when, we've got such a proliferation, let me say that one 10 times fast, of content on the internet anyway. You're looking at some sort of crazy ability to figure this out because there's so many words out there anyway. So that can be a problem as well.
I would think so. Let's talk about some of the solutions, because one of those is a court case, or at least a settlement, I guess I should say. It didn't actually end up in a court. But Warren, let's talk about that, because Publishers Weekly has reported at least one settlement in a plagiarism case. So obviously one action is possibly a court case. Another one, of course, are those issues of the plagiarism detection software. But, of course, your argument is maybe we should hold authors to a higher standard. But what are some of the remedies?
Well, you mentioned the Christine Kane case with Zondervan. And I guess bottom line, the real remedy is doing your own work. That's the thing that authors that love their writing and love their craft do. I mean, that's what Mary does. She does her own work. That's what I do. That's what you do. And that's the bottom line way to prevent plagiarism, is to do your research yourself, do your work yourself. You'll certainly publish fewer books. You won't have a book a year like some authors do, but it'll be your work and your satisfaction.
Well, and let's get into that, because it almost kind of bleeds into the question of ghostwriting too, Warren, because some of these individuals have researchers, and it is, I think, possible, so I want to give the benefit of the doubt, that if you have 2 or 3 researchers, they're on a church staff or they're part of your organization and they're pulling stuff together, and you look at this and you think, oh, that's really great material, and put it in there, and it doesn't necessarily have the right citation, doesn't have quote works around it, that could be the case. It's amazing. Sometimes people ask about a commentary I've written or something like that, and they say, well, you write your commentaries. I say, well, of course I do. So I can tell you where that is. And matter of fact, lots of times I'll even include an HTML site or something in case people want to go back and find it. But if you're letting somebody else do it, the possibility, especially in this digital world, is a lot easier for someone to take something which they think might be the ideas of the researcher and not realize that it had been borrowed, or how we use the word stolen, from another author.
Well, that's right, and that was the defense that Tim Clinton used. And I have to say, by the way, that Dr. Aaron New at Central Baptist College in Arkansas found an awful lot of that material from Dr. Clinton in other people or other people's work and Dr. Clinton's work. But that was the excuse or the defense that they used, that internships did that research, and yet that's still a problem, isn't it? Because you have essentially no credit given to the intern, or no oversight then on the part of the person who's actually putting the name on the label. And it seems to me that if you put your name on an article or a book, you're responsible for the content. And so using researchers and interns to do that kind of work certainly can save you time and can actually help them learn how to do research if indeed you're guiding them in the right way. But you still have to check that. You still have to go behind them so that they actually do learn what to do. And when you catch it and you say, hey, you need to cite this, then they've learned something and you've protected yourself and done the right thing.
Well said. Again, since I'm kind of the oldest guy around the table, I can remember a time when I was writing newspaper columns that appeared like in the Dallas Morning News and Houston Chronicle, a number of things like that. And so back in those days when we didn't have the internet, I would just sometimes make copies and send them out to various individuals so they'd kind of seen what I'd written. And one point I saw somebody was on this magazine. It was amazing. About a month after my commentary would come out in the Dallas Morning News, my op-ed piece, it was remarkably similar. And in that particular case, what he obviously had to do is take that printed copy and retype it. And so at that point, the next time I ran into him at the National Religious Broadcast, I said, it's just amazing how you and I just seem to be thinking about the same kind of things. And it stopped, But then he had to physically do it. And it's kind of like I was just with a smile on my face saying, I caught you. But now with the digital cut and paste, that is more dangerous, but that doesn't remove them from the possibility of still needing to check their work. So let's take a break.
That's right.
When we come back, I know some of you may have a comment or a question about this. We haven't quite gotten into the whole issue of ghostwriting and even the issue of collaborating, because we all have seen books where as you open up the book, you look in the acknowledgement section, it says, without the help of Bob Smith, this book would not have been published, not even been written. You got that right, because Bob Smith wrote the book and somebody else got their name on the front page. And those are the times as a talk show host, you realize, I think I'd like to interview the person that did the background research, because I got the sense that you don't quite know what's in your own book. So we've been down that road before, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk a little bit about plagiarism, ghostwriting, and if nothing else, get back to this question. Does plagiarism matter to Christians? I think to many of you listening, it does. But you've got to wonder the way some of this has been addressed by Christian publishers, whether or not it really seems to matter that much. And so we are privileged to have with us today Warren Throckmorton and Mary DeMuth. Of course, you've had Mary on with us before, and you certainly appreciate the good work she's done as an author. And, of course, I think you would also want to find some great material by Dr. Throckmorton as well. Already calls coming in, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those calls right after this.
November is rushing by, and I'm sure your inbox, mailbox, and ears are already over capacity with screaming announcements for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. No matter how much you're planning to spend on items for your loved ones, don't forget to save something as a gift to the nation on what's come to be known as Giving Tuesday. Your support of Point of View helps unite people across this land from sea to shining sea. Yes, we face many troubling issues, and to put it mildly, we don't always agree. But Point of View believes we can disagree with respect, with honor, with patience, and a view to inform with truth that unites. You make that possible, and we urge you to give that gift to the nation through giving to Point of View. Take just a moment and give generously today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. You can wait for Giving Tuesday, but even better, get a jump and give today with a gift that will truly keep on giving. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Get to some of those calls in just a minute. The article we've posted here, Does Plagiarism Matter to Christians? It's on our website, pointofview.net. We also have a link to Mary DeMuth's website and Warren Throckmorton's website. Of course, this article by Warren Throckmorton, both of them have been speaking to this issue of plagiarism. And let me go around the round table just again to get some of your comments. And by the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those calls in just a minute. But it is, I think, a related issue to plagiarism, and that is when you have individuals that have ghostwriters or individuals that in one way or another are aiding the publication of a particular book. Now, giving credit where credit is due, don't have a problem with that, but sometimes this has been another problem with the celebrity culture. So, Warren Throckmorton, what about that? This is a little different, but it's related to this issue of plagiarism, isn't it?
Well, I think it is. I think that there really is no reason why that the people who are producing the content wouldn't get the credit, except that there's somebody who has a vested interest in getting the credit, and that would be the celebrity Christian. So I really strongly feel that much of the pressure for hurrying up and getting content out and making what might seem like to the author some kind of a honest mistake is not so honest. It's because the people who actually did the work on the material, they're obscured. They're not getting the credit. There is an industry for this. I know you know that, and I don't know how many Christians really understand that there are people who are ghostwriters for hire, and they don't really want the credit. They want the money. And so they want to essentially help somebody establish a kind of reputation. The person who wants the reputation apparently either doesn't write or doesn't want to take the time to, and so they hire someone to do it for them. But it's essentially not a particularly candid or honest procedure.
Yeah. Mary, it's not stealing, but it's misrepresenting, and that's a concern for those of us as Christians as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that most people, when they pick up a book and they see somebody's name on the cover, they think that that person wrote that book and did the hard work of due diligence to make sure that it's their words. And so there has been a good conversation going on in the Christian writing industry for a long time about the efficacy or if it's ethical to have ghostwriters. And the vast majority of Christian writers would say it's not ethical. And so there's been a real push to add the with. So it might say name of celebrity with name of ghostwriter or collaborative writer, which is a better way of how we'd like to describe it. Yes, there are ghostwriters out there, and they provide that service. But I think ultimately when you, like I said, when you pick up a book, it feels a lot to me like lying because you're saying this celebrity name wrote this book when in actuality they did not. And I think that's a heart issue, and I think it has a lot to do with, getting that content out. And even, I'm a writer I'm a fast writer, so I write 2 to 3 books a year, and I have been doing that for over a decade, but I still write my own books. I am in the middle of writing a book very fast within just a few weeks about the sexual abuse crisis in the church, and I am doing 100% of all my research, and I am citing it like crazy because I want people who have that statistic or have that quote, I want them to have the credit for the hard work that they've done. And so when it doesn't happen, I just get really discouraged. I think, is this just all about getting your name on a book and getting it out there so you can make a lot of money or make money for publishers? And I think that's wrong.
Let me come back to that for just a minute because you've probably read a few of my books over the years. You know I put a lot of endnotes into it, and there are authors that I have on this program sometimes that it's maybe 20 pages worth of endnotes. I do have some problems, Mary, sometimes when I pick up a book and there's not one footnote, not one endnote, because then what can I do with it? And how do I even know it's the case? And how can I go and find the original article to check it? Or more importantly, find that original article that I might want to use in a commentary. So I've got some problems about just the fact that some of these books have no references to them at all.
Exactly. And then if you go over to academic writing, and we see the penalty a little bit stronger, although maybe not so much with Tim Clinton, but with people in academic circles, if they're not citing or they cite wrong, they get fired. I mean, it is a big deal in other places, and that's why it makes me mad that it's not a big deal in Christian circles.
Warren, any comments about that as well? Because I know that, for example, in your most recent book on getting Jefferson right and others, you were doing a lot of fact-checking of other authors. And as a result, it seems to me that if somebody says, well, wait a minute, where'd you get that? An endnote, a footnote, some other citations are absolutely essential.
Oh, right. Mary's absolutely right that in academia, if you don't cite your sources, then the book is not very useful because the students have to be able to look it up and not only verify it, but use the material and explore it further. But if you're caught plagiarizing, or if it's something that you do, then your reputation is really sullied. And so in academia, it does really matter. And that's part of why and then Dr. New and I have really, looked at this, and Mary, and is that it's just hard to believe. We kind of sit back and just, it's like a different universe almost to see what happens in academia and even in journalism when somebody plagiarizes, and then to look at in ministry circles where you would think the ethics would be so much higher, and sadly they don't seem to be. So the consequences just don't seem to be there, and that's what's perplexing.
Well, again, let me give high praise to you and Mindy Belts and Mary DeMuth and some others that have raised that. If you don't mind, we've got a number of people that would like to ask you some questions. So let's see if we can try to work our way through some of those calls. We'll go to Georgia first, and Charlie is at line 3. Let's see if we can get him on. Charlie?
Hey, this is Charlie.
Yes, go ahead.
Years ago, I started writing gospel tracts, and I've written so many that I thought I would like to turn it into like a daily devotional. But they're based on Ray Comfort's The Way of the Master Evangelism method, and I was just wondering if that was too close to plagiarism, even though he means to teach us how to evangelize.
Well, it seems to me that by providing some notes to the book, and again, I think Ray Comfort be I've had him in studio before. I think he'd be pretty open to having you write a letter and just say, this is what I'm thinking about. What do you think? Because after all, you are the person that generated some of that, and some footnotes back to some of the tracts you've written that then become kind of a devotional book seem appropriate. But Warren, let me come to you. Any thoughts?
Well, I think if he's using any material verbatim, that would, of course, need to be in quotes with a footnote, some sort of citation. But if he wanted to turn it into something that was to be offered to the public, I think your suggestion is a good one, that he contact Mr. Comfort and indicate what his thoughts are, and he could get permission. Again, what we're really talking about here is using the material as if it's your own and without permission.
Yeah.
Those are a couple of key points.
Sometimes I'll put in, Mary, an end note that just simply says, although this was written in this book in this way, I'm using the outline but adding my new material to it or my own insights to it. So somebody says, well, wait a minute, that structure looks a little bit like The Way of the Master. That structure looks like something in a book by Chuck Colson or whatever, but I'm using the outline, but I'm including my material. I think just having any kind of disclaimer like that in an endnote really solves the problem of plagiarism, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and this exact thing just happened in his book where he's talking about habits. So he's quoting Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habit, and he said something like, these 4 stages of habit are from him, but I'm elaborating here. And that's just as simple as it can be. Like he gave the guy all the credit and then said, but I'm adding a little bit to it, and this is why, and this is how I found it to be true in my own life. And I think that's absolutely permissible. You have the phenomenon of fan fiction, which is also a permissible thing, and you also have, kind of the idea of creative nonfiction where it's permissible to recreate a scene like Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, or even in my own memoir, Thin Places. I couldn't, perfectly create a scene from when I was 5 years old, but I have a really good memory, and I can rewrite that scene to add some compelling elements to it, as long as I'm not, violating the truth.
Perfect. Let's take a break. We got another call or two, and we'll see if we can get to that. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Does plagiarism matter to Christians? That's the article we've posted, and it's all at our website, pointofview.net.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Each week I get an email with a list of cases about prisoners asserting their right to the free exercise of religion. I find it fascinating that even in jail we protect religious liberty. Here's just a sampling of the cases I see each week. In Nunez v. Wirtz, a Pennsylvania federal court allowed a complaint by a Muslim inmate to move forward after his complaint asserted that he had been denied the right to wear his pant legs rolled up, except during his religious services. In Illinois, a federal court allowed an inmate to move forward with his assertion that the prison was not providing him with a diet consistent with his Native American religious beliefs. In Gambino v. Payne, a magistrate recommended dismissing the case of an inmate converting to Judaism. Apparently, the free exercise clause was not sufficient to protect against his complaint of inadequate privacy in the showers. Finally, a Catholic inmate in California is allowed to amend his complaint, but the court dismissed his original complaint. Evidently, the court was not inclined to let him leave confinement to attend a funeral. Some cases appear to have less merit than others. Inmates sometimes have little else to do but file lawsuits. Nonetheless, judges take complaints of the denial of religious liberty seriously, even if that denial comes from a jail cell. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that we're also going to spend some time talking about both of the websites by Warren Throckmorton as well as Mary DeMuth. Of course, she's been on before talking about her Pray Every Day podcast and Restory and a number of other things, so you might want to make sure that you visit those websites. But let's go to another caller, Orban in the state of Texas. Orban, thank you for joining us today. What's your comment or question?
Well, thank you, Kerby, and thank you, Mary and Warren, for what you're bringing to us today. I would like to ask you a question. When I'm a ham radio operator, and I've told a lot of stories about going to Alaska for a 2-week vacation and end up spending 20 years on a vacation. God gave me a lot of adventure up there, And I tell these stories on ham radio, and somebody said the other day, Orban, if you don't write a book, I'm going to write it for you. But I go over here to the Youth with the Mission Christian Writers Group, and they're helping me, trying to help me produce a book. But they said you need to get a ghost author because I'm not very skookum on how to write, like a book. But anyway, I was just wondered, when I tell stories on ham radio, can they take that and use that for their book? Because I've had things stolen in Alaska before, kind of like when I was auctioneer up there. People would call me and say, Orban, are you selling cars for Gene's Auto? And I said, no. They said, yes, you are too. It's your auction chant. I did a little short clip for Habitat for Humanity, and they just took it and used it for their commercials. But I just wonder how careful you have to be in what you say or what else somebody else can take.
Good point. Mary, let me come to you because I know that you've made a point of making sure that you get copyrights and things like that because we've all had situations where we see something that looks vaguely familiar and you're saying, yeah, I'm pretty sure I wrote that, but it's got somebody else's name on it.
Yeah, the law in the land is that if you write it somewhere and your name is attached to it, like if you've written it in a document, there's the word automatically, chronicles that. It's yours. And so you don't have to worry so much. I have a lot of first-time authors who are like, oh, I'm just so afraid people are going to steal my words. They can, but it's against the law. And if you've written it and you can prove that you've written it, it's yours. In terms of hiring a collaborative writer, that is a really great practice to do. If you just really struggle with writing, but you have these amazing stories, you can tell them to someone who is a collaborative writer, and they can write the book. The issue is will you give them credit? And most people who have a collaborative writer, by and far, want the person who wrote the book to have their name on the cover with the person whose story it is. That's just kind of, you didn't write it. And that's okay. That's a normative practice. And it's not lying. It's actually, telling the truth of who wrote the book.
So again, Warren, any comments?
Well, I completely agree. I think that the collaborative writing concept is a good one. My agreement with her is complete in that just give credit. Just include that on the cover and in the acknowledgments, and everybody knows who did what.
Let's, if we can, just before I run out of time, I want to encourage people to go to wthrockmorton.com. Now, the good news is you don't have to know how to spell your name because we have a link there. But when they go there, they will find a lot of great material over the years that you've written about. So talk about when people land on your website, what they can find and what are some of the resources that might be available to them.
Well, there are articles on a variety of issues. I write about mental health issues because I'm a psychology professor, but also my observations about current events in the church, political issues, and have kind of a history of, or rather a hobby of examining historical claims. So they'll find a lot of that there too.
Yes, again, I might just mention your book on the fact-checking on Jefferson. So that is one resource that is available there. Mary, let's talk about yours as well, because people can, first of all, find out about all the different books that you've written. They can have you pray for them. And also, we might just talk about the fact that you've been working on everything from a toxic relationship, the 7 deadly friendships, to, of course, the one you're working on right now in terms of all the whole issue of sexual abuse. So talk about what people will find when they land on your website.
Yeah, they'll find all the things that you just said, which is super sweet. And I also wrote a piece for religionnews.com about this very issue of plagiarism. So if someone Googles religionnews.com and my name, they'll be able to find other instances of plagiarism within the Christian community. And of course, I love to pray for people every day. So if someone needs prayer, they can just go to prayeveryday.show and they can be prayed for.
I might just mention, too, that people can schedule you to speak. And let me go see if I can find that article, and we'll post that one there so others can find that as well. But just as we're coming to the end here, Warren, talk about, again, this idea, does plagiarism matter to Christians? The theme that we've sort of talked about is that I think most people are really somewhat concerned about that. Do you have any action items? I mean, is this maybe a place where I should encourage some of our listeners to write to some of these Christian publishing houses or maybe post some of these articles on the website and kind of create a movement and say, wait a minute, we are the consumers of these books and these articles, and we naively assume that the books and articles that have a person's name on it were written by those individuals. What would you suggest as an action item, since we have a lot of activists that listen to this program?
Well, I think that what you implied there is good. That when your listeners hear of publications that have been plagiarized, that they do contact the publisher. And in the case of the two articles that you featured here, mine and Mary's, there are quite a few publishers and authors that are mentioned in both articles, and basically very little happened. Very little came from the publisher. There were almost no apologies that were given and from the individuals involved. And I don't think it's too late. I think that the publishers could revisit these issues. The American Association of Christian Counselors, for instance, said very little about what happened in their publications where the plagiarism was. They essentially hoped it would go away. So if there are any Christian counselors or those who use any of the AACC material, they certainly could contact the AACC and register their concerns.
Well, and again, hope people will post this on maybe their Twitter account or their Facebook account. And then I'll prepare them now for what they'll see. You get what I call the argument from priorities. You know, you get somebody who's pro-life and said, well, in a country where we abort babies, why should we worry about plagiarism? Or maybe somebody that's more liberal says, well, in a country where all the things that Donald Trump says, why should we care about plagiarism? But we should care about that. And I think that sometimes when I see these strands and these various comments being made on Twitter posts, I go, really? I mean, because this is an issue, and it might become a bigger issue if some of our listeners make an issue out of it. So that's one of the reasons I want to talk about it today. And I know, Mary, you are a busy woman writing right now. Warren, I know you're a very busy person, so I appreciate both of you giving us an hour today to talk about what I think is a very important issue, and I hope maybe we can come back to it sometime in the future.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to spend a little bit of time talking about another issue. This new book called Standing Up to Goliath really gets into the whole question about mandatory unions for teachers. And we're going to be talking to a woman whose case went all the way to the Supreme Court, Rebecca Friedrichs. It's Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association. And it looked like the Supreme Court was going to rule in her favor 5-4. And then Justice Antonin Scalia passed away. He died. And so it ended up being a 4-4 tie, and no action then pursued that. But then we have a new case that came out this year, the Janus versus AFSCME, that actually did rule in that favor. So we'll talk about this issue of what is happening in the schools, school unions, teachers unions, and much more. And if you'd like to join us, certainly that will be a topic we will address. And since it is Thanksgiving week, that means some of you teachers actually might be able to listen to the program today. And I'd love to get your comments about this right after these messages.
November is rushing by, and I'm sure your inbox, mailbox, and ears are already over capacity with screaming announcements for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. No matter how much you're planning to spend on items for your loved ones, don't forget to save something as a gift to the nation on what's come to be known as Giving Tuesday. Your support of Point of View helps unite people across this land from sea to shining sea. Yes, we face many troubling issues, and to put it mildly, we don't always agree. But Point of View believes we can disagree with respect, with honor, with patience, and a view to inform with truth that unites. You make that possible, and we urge you to give that gift to the nation through giving to Point of View. Take just a moment and give generously today at pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151. You can wait for Giving Tuesday, but even better, get a jump and give today with a gift that will truly keep on giving. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you listen to this program any length of time, you know that we've oftentimes talked about what is taking place in the field of education. And especially this Thanksgiving week, I thought this would be a great opportunity, since some of you may be teachers listening to this program today and normally can't listen because you're in the classroom. Your comments will be really appreciated as we focus in particular on these national teachers unions. And we've covered this over the years. You might remember a very famous case that came out of California, and our California listeners are well aware of that. Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association went to the Supreme Court in 2016. Looked like there would be a decision rendered, a 5-4 decision, and that's when Justice Antonin Scalia died. And because of that, it ended up as a 4-4 deadlock. But, of course, this year, then, we've had the so-called Janus case that went to the Supreme Court, and indeed was one that was rendered in that regard. So we thought it would be good to give you some of that history. And you can find that in this new book, Standing Up to Goliath, Battling State and National Teachers Unions for the Heart and Soul of Our Kids and Country. And that is written by Rebecca Friedrichs, who, of course, was part of that particular case, a public school teacher for 28 years, and very concerned about some of the things being done by the teachers' unions. And so as a result, she has written this book and now joins us now by phone. And so, Rebecca, it is a delight to have you on the program with us.
Well, hey there, Kerby. It's really nice to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate the work that you have done over the years. We appreciate you joining us in the past and now today. And in this book, right off the bat, you tell us the story of this poor teacher who stood up and just asked a question. And it seemed to me like a pretty good question, and that is, can we change the direction of where the teachers' union money is going? And she was vilified. And as you say in your book, you say, I wish I knew her name. I wish I could find her. I wish I could take her out to dinner, give her some flowers, all the rest. Well, if nothing else, to apologize because we didn't defend her. But tell the story, because it's how you open the book, and I think it illustrates what happens if you find yourself on the wrong side of the teachers' unions.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. I was a teacher union leader. I was serving as the secretary on my executive board of my local association. All those teachers on my local association were great. We all loved the kids. We all wanted to do what was right. But we were at a state California Teachers Association conference, leadership conference. And the entire week we had been trying to make our voices heard. And quite frankly, we were bullied over and over and silenced for daring to ask for support that we actually desired instead of being involved in their politics. There was this entire group of teachers. There were about 300 of us in a ballroom. We were eating a meal, and that teacher you just mentioned stood up during Q&A and basically said, I'm here representing my local teachers, and we are concerned because it seems that all of our money is going to far-left politics we don't support, and we would like to know how we can stop the use of our dues going to politics. This is supposed to be a labor union. She was not only immediately shut down, but the leaders of the NEA at that time on stage were Lilia Eskelsen Garcia, who's currently their president, and there were some CTA leaders. they kind of huddled together on the stage in a very angry fashion and basically told her what for. They basically said, look, the union's way is the only way. Our politics are the only right politics. If you don't agree with us, they didn't use the word bigot, but they gave you that feeling that if you didn't do it their way and you questioned them, you were a bigot. And then these other leaders in the crowd sort of stood around with their arms crossed, these angry looks on their face at this lady who dared to question where her $1,200 a year was being spent. And they literally withered her into her chair. She withered. And I describe in the book that I was glued to my chair. I couldn't even rescue her. All 300 of us, dead silent. We were like children being bullied on a playground. I cannot express how badly I feel that I did not come to her defense. And I made myself a promise that day that I would never again sit idly by while the teachers' unions abused a fellow teacher. And that's why I fight today.
Well, and let's talk about what happened with you, because it's one thing to raise that in a meeting where you kind of just wither into your chair and go, okay, I'm never going to say anything about that again. It's another thing to be the face of the movement, which is what you became. So talk about that for a minute, if you might.
Yeah, well, interestingly, this all started as part of my Bible study. I sit in the morning, every single morning, I start my day. I believe in first fruits to the Lord. So I start my day in my Bible. And I was doing a Beth Moore Bible study, and she asked a question, and that was, is there something the Lord's been asking you to do, and you know you're supposed to do it, but you haven't? Either you're scared or you don't know what to do or something. You haven't obeyed him. And I knew exactly what it was. I was supposed to be writing for publication. And so after praying over that for 3 days and telling God how scared I was and how I wasn't going to answer the question, he led me to the widow's mite story and used that story. In case the listeners don't know, the widow's mite is Jesus saw this widow. She had placed 2 mites, which is basically like 2 pennies, into the offering jar. And he pointed her out to his disciples and said, she just gave more than all the wealthy. She gave more than anyone else because she gave out of her faith. She gave out of her nothingness. And so the Lord used that story in my heart and said, Rebecca, look, I'm not asking you to fix all the problems in the world. Just obey me. Just give me your writing, and let me worry about, what happens with it. Let me worry about publications. I was afraid of being rejected. So I took that promise from God, and I started writing editorials to expose what was really going on within the teachers' union, because I couldn't make a difference from the inside. As a teacher, serving as a union leader, I was silenced. I was bullied. My teacher friends were all bullied. We're used constantly. We don't want to strike. We don't want to do all these awful things. We're just bullied to do it. So I decided I needed to write editorials to expose that. Well, as God would so often do, 2 mites in his hands went a lot further. I just wanted to write one editorial in the Orange County Register in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Within 6 months, I was lead plaintiff in a federal lawsuit suing the California Teachers Association, the National Education Association, headed all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And then the state of California intervened against us, and the Obama administration intervened against us. So we were 10 California teachers, all believers, standing against the most powerful union in the state of California, the most powerful union in the country, the meanest too, the state of California and the United States of America. So everyone called us David versus Goliath.
And that's of course,
the title of the book.
Title of the book, Standing Up to Goliath. I need to take a break, and let me just mention real quickly that it's about a 300-page book. Of course, we had Debbie Georgiadis do an interview with you when the book was coming out. Now it is out, and we have a link so that you can get it in hardcover. Of course, eventually it's coming out in audiobook as well. 28 chapters, 300 pages, just some great material. And this is what happens to an individual since the age of 12 who wanted to be a teacher and all of a sudden finds herself on the national spotlight. Standing Up to Goliath, battling state and national teachers' unions for the heart and soul of our kids and country. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Before we head to Thanksgiving dinners, I wanted to talk about the mass shooting in California. Although the shooting and the public reaction were similar, the venue was different and worthy of a mention. For months, pundits and candidates have talked about the need for common sense gun control measures. Whenever I use the term on radio, I inevitably get a caller asking me what these common sense measures might be. I explain that it's mostly a term developed from focus groups used so that you don't have to go into specifics. But I think you could say that the state of California has implemented most, if not all, of the measures gun control advocates desire. Don't take my word for it. Just look at the #1 rating the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence gives to California. It exceeds every other state in gun regulation. Obviously, it requires all gun sales to be processed through a licensed dealer who must do a background check. It bans most so-called assault weapons as well as 50 caliber rifles. It restricts the sale, transfer, manufacture, and possession of a large capacity ammunition magazine. It regulates gun shows. It imposes a 10-day waiting period. It gives local law enforcement discretion to deny a license to carry a concealed weapon. And it became the first jurisdiction in the nation to enact a gun violence restraining order. Actually, that's a partial list, but you get the idea. If there was ever a state that has implemented what advocates have called common sense gun laws, it is the state of California. Thus, the obvious question we should ask of people advocating more restrictive gun control is what additional laws could have prevented the shooting in the California bar? I can't think of any. Sadly, it's hard to prevent an evil or unbalanced person who wants to use a weapon to kill others. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Rebecca Friedrichs with us today. And again, if you would like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212, Standing Up to Goliath, battling state and national teachers unions for the heart and soul of our kids and our country. Let's, if we can, maybe also talk about what was happening in the schools. Chapter 3, you started out with a quote that said, "We don't get rid of the dirt in America's unionized schools. We move it around and sweep it under the rug." I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Waiting for Superman, but that was the reminder to me of how some teachers just were either incompetent in the classroom or maybe actually had some kind of accusations, but instead of being able to get rid of those individuals like you would in a business, a corporation, or even in the academy, many of them would just go to essentially like a teacher's study hall and sit there and read the newspapers all day. Or, as you said, sometimes they sweep everything under the rug. So there is a sense in which we don't have the kind of accountability in some of these government schools that I think most Americans would have assumed actually takes place.
Yeah, it's really sad. In that particular chapter, I highlight a topless teacher that doesn't lose her job.
Yes.
I mean, she's topless in front of all the kids. Drunk teachers that don't lose their jobs. It's unbelievable. But what I think I'd like to highlight in this conversation is a principal named Eileen Blagden. She's highlighted in that chapter. Eileen, one of the best principals I know. She's a personal friend. Started out as a teacher, great teacher too. She had a teacher on her campus who was unstable. He not only had some past run-ins with the law, which the district never told Eileen about, by the way, but he came to work one day and told Eileen that he wanted to kill the other kindergarten teachers who taught with him, wanted to kill them. Eileen thought it was a good idea to protect those teachers and the children from this guy. And when you read the book, there's more information about this gentleman and what he was doing as a kindergarten teacher, why the school district chose to put this unstable guy in kindergarten is another disturbing question we need to ask. Anyway, Eileen tried to get him removed, and instead of doing that, the district sent the teachers union out. And unfortunately, the problem wasn't taken care of to Eileen's satisfaction. So Eileen said, hey, I'm going to have to call the police. And she was told by her district, you'll be sorry if you do that. Well, she called the police because she, wanted to protect the children and the teachers in her care. And you'll read in the book that Eileen went through all kinds of harassment, including demotion. And I don't want to give away the whole story, but it's unbelievable what she went through and how she was abused as a principal trying to protect children and teachers from an unstable man.
Wow. Well, and that relates a lot to Chapter 4, where you talk about this culture of fear, which we've already sort of alluded to, but again, it's just an illustration that there are consequences to speaking out. There are consequences in even using common sense and doing the right thing, aren't there?
Yeah, that's right. Last time I talked on your show, I think we discussed the sex ed that's going on. Mm-hmm. It's all over. It's going through the UN, and it's all over. It's not just California, people. Don't think you're safe if you're not in California. It's happening here, normalizing anal sex for our little kids in our classrooms and telling us teachers that we have to teach this stuff. And, hey, if we're not comfortable with it, no big deal. Then they'll bring in the experts from Planned Parenthood to do it for us. It's scary stuff. Well, I have some teacher friends who served at the National Education Association, which is the national level of the teachers' unions, and they served as teacher representatives. And they're good and loving teachers, as are most teachers are good and loving. We've just been taken over and silenced by a very angry union. Anyway, this teacher friend of mine, Sue Halverson, went in as a teacher representative, and she said, hey, this sex ed that the union's promoting, this isn't even medically accurate. It's dangerous for the kids. We need some balance here. None of the parents I know would be comfortable with these lessons. And, when she took that as a teacher representative at the NEA, she was barred from serving on any sex committees because she dared to question the political agenda of the unions, and she has been spit upon. And when she's pushed back and said, hey, wait a minute, I'm standing up for the kids and the teachers and for safety and for decency and wholesome values, she has literally been told by other representatives, there's a special place in hell for people like you. Wow. This is how teachers are treated when we serve at the state or national levels of the teachers' unions to try to protect our colleagues, to try to protect our students. This is why 9 other teachers and I sued the unions and are trying to free teachers from this abusive relationship.
Incredible. Let's take a phone call or two along the way, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. In the state of California, KYCC, Sherry, I think you have a question for Rebecca. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a family member that is a teacher, and he was told that he has to be a member, first off, of the California Teachers Association to have a job in this unified public school district, and that also he has to be a member so that if he should ever be sued because of something in the classroom, that is the only way they would defend him. Can you comment on that and give me any information?
First of all, Sherry, I'm so grateful that you called today, and it's really nice to meet you from your same state out here in California. Thank you for calling. Both of your questions are vital. Number one, it used to be a requirement for all teachers to pay the unions. We were all forced to fund them. But our lawsuit was suing to stop that. Our whole goal was to free every government employee, including teachers, from forced unionism. And that battle was just won on June 27th, 2018. So it is now not a requirement. All teachers, all government employees who are in a union shop are no longer required to pay a union. We can leave them, it's called opting out, and pay them nothing. If he needs to find out how to do it, he can come to our website, forkidsandcountry.org, go to Teacher Freedom, and we have forms that he can fill out and send them in. Now, you need to know he will be harassed. He will be bullied by the unions. He will be isolated. They have taught teachers to bully one another. Teachers love their local association because they know they're in a corrupt system and they need each other. So they love their local. And so what teachers don't understand, because the unions have lied to them, they think when a teacher like did you say it was your nephew, your friend?
No, I really didn't want to say it is.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't blame.
Remember. Yeah.
Yes, I don't blame. Because they're all afraid. I totally get it.
Yep.
When teachers like that leave, their colleagues are told, "Oh, he's a union buster. Oh, he's not in the club. He doesn't agree with us. He's against us." That's how they control teachers. That's how they make us turn against each other. So teachers need to understand, no, these unions are using you to fund a social, sexual, and political agenda, a very divisive agenda in our country, and they're trying to hold you into their system so that they can keep your money. So when he opts out, he needs to know he will be bullied. But he can also find on our website a lot of information about how to have a program called Adopt a Teacher, where I ask people like you to adopt every teacher you love, all the teachers you know, and just give them my book so they can read it and find out the truth about how they're really being represented by these state and national unions. And then I teach the teachers that they are actually allowed to stand together, decertify this whole web of union nightmare, and they can then just have their own local association and everybody's happy. So that's the first answer. And then the second answer, you asked about the suing. So the unions, since the 1950s, the unions have been telling teachers that if they leave the union or don't join the union, then they're going to get sued. There's a few stories in the book about that. So the truth is this. When you are a teacher union member, yes, you get some liability insurance that costs the unions about $3 a person to cover you, and it's $1 million coverage. Most teachers I know, even though they have that coverage, the union has not defended them. I have a girlfriend, one of the best teachers I know, was just fired in 3 days for daring to discipline a child. That's all she did, discipline. She didn't hurt him. She just, made sure he didn't hurt another child. The union would not defend her. So they're not going to defend you or protect you, and they claim that they are your defender. You can get liability insurance from Association of American Educators or Christian Educators Association International. Double the coverage for a couple $100 a year.
Okay, we'll be right back.
November is rushing by, and I'm sure your inbox, mailbox, and ears are already over capacity with screaming announcements for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. No matter how much you're planning to spend on items for your loved ones, don't forget to save something as a gift to the nation on what's come to be known as Giving Tuesday. Your support of Point of View helps unite people across this land from sea to shining sea. Yes, we face many troubling issues, and to put it mildly, we don't always agree. But Point of View believes we can disagree with respect, with honor, with patience, and a view to inform with truth that unites. You make that possible, and we urge you to give that gift to the nation through giving to Point of View. Take just a moment and give generously today at pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151. You can wait for Giving Tuesday, but even better, get a jump and give today with a gift that will truly keep on giving. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212, as we talk today about standing up to Goliath. And Rebecca, for just a minute, I thought it'd be good to talk about what's on your website, because you were just directing Sherry to that website. It's forkidsandcountry.org. You don't have to remember all of that. We have a link there as well. There's a way in which you can adopt a teacher. There's information about sex education, which we can get into in just a minute. There are all sorts of great resources. But talk about what people will find on your website. Obviously, they can get the book, but they can also schedule you to speak and provide a lot of other materials. So talk about when they land on forkidsandcountry.org, what they find.
Great, thanks for asking. Well, For Kids and Country is meant to be a one-stop shop, just to help people who are struggling either with finding what's right for their children in school, fighting against what's wrong, or teachers who are confused about how can I leave the union, or what does the union really believe. So we're For Kids and Country because we're not about what we're against, and we're not about who we are. We're about who we're for. We're for the kids, and we're for the country. So if you come to our website, you can find teacher resources. It's not resources like what you're going to teach in the classroom the next day, nothing like that. But you can find out how to opt out of the union. We lead you to other organizations that help you to do that. We don't help you with it personally. We just help you find the information. We have information educating you about what's actually in the sex ed. We have videos, teacher videos, and vignettes of teacher stories, teachers who are featured in my book, some who are not, all telling their stories of how the union has treated them and what's really going on in our schools. Our goal is several. Number one, to help teachers to understand you are not alone. If you're a loving teacher and you are a good teacher and you just love the kids and you're fed up with being used to push a political agenda, you might not even like politics, but here you are being used to push these politics, and your job has gotten horrible and teachers are demoralized and you're just worn out. Come to our website. You'll hear stories from other teachers like you. We're hoping to encourage you. We're hoping that other teachers will discover that they're not alone like the union says they are, that parents do not hate you and the community does not hate you and everybody really does want to pay you well. It's a lie that we don't want to do those things for you. So For Kids and Country is a way. Here's our mission. It's uniting, engaging, educating, and empowering parents, teachers, students, faith leaders, and community members, citizens, in the fight to restore our schools and culture. So anything related to that, if we have access to it, we're going to share it with you on our site.
One of the things I think is so intriguing when I go to your website is when you talk about the book, you say, warning, this book contains sexually explicit subjects that are not appropriate for children, even though kids are learning this stuff in America's public schools. And It reminds me that sometimes in the past when Marlon Maddox was the host, or even as I've been the host, or Penna Dexter, or Debbie Georgiadis and others, will sometimes say, let's talk about what's in the books. And we realize, no, we can't even talk about that on the air. First of all, we do have children listen, so I would be, but it is amazing that you can't even talk about some of the things on the radio without the FCC getting upset with us about using those words, those terms, and those ideas. And yet that's exactly what our young children are studying in some of these public schools, which is just amazing to me.
Well, it's unbelievable. And it's just, I asked my publisher to put that warning on the back of my book because I was so worried that a parent, this is a teacher wrote this book. Sure, go ahead and read it, and their kid might read it. Children cannot read this book. This is a book for adults to understand how teachers have now been used, abused, and degraded for 50 years. Our money and our loving profession are, we have an apple pie image. People trust teachers. So this union came in, took us over, convinced us that they were on our side, used our money, used our a good reputation to push their social, sexual, and political agenda into our schools and into our culture. And this is why our culture is so divided right now. I have in the book it's all stories. The book is all very engaging stories from dozens of teachers and parents and kids and myself. I tell all the stories. So it's not a boring read. It's a really engaging read. But I also throw in now and then a couple of stats, like the kind of money the California Teachers Association is spending on politics with teacher money. And it's, what I would plead, anyone listening, go on to the National Education Association, NEA.org website, and read their new business items, read their resolutions, read what they're supporting politically. Same thing with California Teachers Association, Oregon Education Ohio Education Association, any of them, any of these state national unions, especially if you're a teacher paying them. Find out what you're actually funding, because you are funding. Look, the teachers' unions help organize Black Lives Matter. I've seen it on their website. I've seen it on magazines they send to my house. They help organize those ladies in the pink hats. I've seen it on all the stuff that I'm forced to pay for. The teachers' unions are the ones who inspired and organized March for Our Lives, where children all over the country left the classroom to march against guns instead of learning. And it was an angry, divisive, and when parents went and said to their principal, hey, I don't want my child marching in this. I personally know parents who were abused by the school administration. You get off the campus. You don't have anything to do with this. That's what teachers' unions have done to our schools, state and national teachers' unions.
Let's take some phone calls, and then we'll get into some of the dollar amounts. But we'll stay in the state of California for just a minute. Let's go to Jenny first. Thank you for joining us today. You're on with Rebecca Friedrichs.
Hello, Rebecca.
Hi,
can you hear me?
I can.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for stepping out in obedience to what God has called you to. Amen, and God bless you.
Thank you.
And I think the word that I have to say is it is time for us in the United States of America who stand for purity and for truth in God to stand up and take action and call for a protest, but a protest that stands for calling our kids out of the schools. No longer will they have and say no more, no more. We should pick a day. I think we need to pick a day and a time to start this and not stop it until this radical, evil leftism is removed from what is being taught to our children. And it's not going to happen until we all take a stand together. It's going to have to be massive. So if we say, no, we do not stand for these things that you're teaching our children in school and get down to the actual curriculum and teaching goodness and wholesomeness, I believe that that is when something is going to change, and just to refuse to let them to inject this into our society any longer.
Yes. Well, I can say amen, Jenny, and I also would like to ask you to go on our website and send us an email, get signed up with us, because this is exactly what we're doing. For Kids and Country is it's another thing God laid on my heart, and that was, Rebecca, when you write this book and teachers and parents and faith leaders get educated on what's really going on, now what? What are they going to do now? And so he laid on my heart that we needed to come together, that the unions have divided all of us. They've divided our country. They've divided us by class, by race, by religion, and we need to all come back together again. So that's our goal For Kids and Country, is to bring everyone back together again, and we are already building grassroots, parents and teachers and faith leaders and citizens standing together here in California. Our trouble is we don't have this massive organization, massive amounts of money behind us. We're just a bunch of loving people standing together. So we need lots and lots and lots of help. So we need you, Jenny, if you'll sign up. Love your idea. And then the other thing, there is something in my book toward the end where the last two chapters are hope. You know, the whole book is laying out all these stories of what the union's done to teachers, to our schools, to our country, and it's really sad. but everyone needs to read it. They need to understand what's happened and how we got to the place we're at today. Why churches are under attack, too. That's coming from the unions as well. So, but the last two chapters are hope. And in that hope, I talk about how the National Education Association was originally started in the 1800s by loving teachers. And their goal was to get Scripture into the hands of children in America's schools, because America's schools were using the Bible as their main textbook at the beginning.
Yes.
And so these teachers just wanted to help, and they were taken over by the union.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we have some more phone calls. And, of course, if you have just joined us, talking about standing up to Goliath, battling state and national teachers' unions for the heart and soul of our kids and country. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Each week I get an email with a list of cases about prisoners asserting their right to the free exercise of religion. I find it fascinating that even in jail we protect religious liberty. Here's just a sampling of the cases I see each week. In Nunez v. Wirtz, a Pennsylvania federal court allowed a complaint by a Muslim inmate to move forward after his complaint asserted that he had been denied the right to wear his pant legs rolled up, except during his religious services. In Illinois, a federal court allowed an inmate to move forward with his assertion that the prison was not providing him with a diet consistent with his Native American religious beliefs. In Gambino v. Payne, a magistrate recommended dismissing the case of an inmate converting to Judaism. Apparently, the free exercise clause was not sufficient to protect against his complaint of inadequate privacy in the showers. Finally, a Catholic inmate in California is allowed to amend his complaint, but the court dismissed his original complaint. Evidently, the court was not inclined to let him leave confinement to attend a funeral. Some cases appear to have less merit than others. Inmates sometimes have little else to do but file lawsuits. Nonetheless, judges take complaints of the denial of religious liberty seriously, even if that denial comes from a jail cell. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Rebecca Friedrichs with us for just a few more minutes. And Rebecca, before we take another phone call, let's talk about money for just a minute. You sort of alluded to that, but rather than give people dollar figures, I thought there was a good way that you used in your book to explain that. And that is when you look at how much money the California Teachers Association spent, or if you look nationally at the NEA, the National Education Association, and compare it to other things like we talk about the money from big business or the money from big pharma. Just in California alone, the California Teachers Association, which is an affiliate of NEA, spent twice as much money as so-called big pharma, which is big in California. I used to live in California, so I understand that only so well. And yet the mainstream media talks about big business and too much money in the elections. They never talk about big labor. They never talk about big teachers unions, but that's where a lot of the money is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly. And I'm so glad you pulled out that stat from the book because, I constantly hear about big pharma and all their, supposed evils, but I never, ever, ever hear about the teachers' unions. And here's one other problem. Big pharma at least is earning the money. They're selling a product and people are buying it. Now, if they're doing things that aren't right with it, that's between them and God and them and the government or whatever. But the teachers' unions have been stealing this money from teachers for decades because we all were forced to fund them as a condition of employment, as were all government employees. So literally they've been taking billions. People need to understand it's billions a year that these unions collect from workers, and they're funding a divisive social, sexual, and political agenda with that money. So the one way we can stop all of this money going out funding these agendas that are against the values of almost all Americans. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or maybe you're Jewish, maybe you're Muslim. Your values don't match the values of this far left, angry, sexual agenda. So they're taking this money in the form of dues, union dues, and spending it on politics. So what do? We stop giving them the money because we suddenly, this June, we're freed. We can now pay them nothing. It's going to be a big fight because they're going to bully us to continue giving them the money. But we have an opportunity now, like Jenny said, to stand together and to say, enough's enough. I'm not going to give you this money anymore. You can't take it from me anymore. I hear people all the time blame George Soros for all of our problems. George Soros only has so much money, and one man can't organize mobs of people to protest and do angry, horrible things all across our country. Unions can. They have the ability to organize and the money. So we just need to stop giving them our money. It's that simple.
Let's give a few more callers a chance to join the conversation and run out to the state of Texas this time. KJRT and Alex, what's your comment?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, hi, how you doing? Listen, I am so impressed with what you're doing. We had an event here in Amarillo right after the Parkland situation. And something about that smelled so fishy. And so I went on ahead and attended this march for our lives event, and it was totally left-leaning. And I witnessed adult types that were there that were not organic. I could tell they were placed. And the poor students were totally exploited,
Yes, they were.
As political pawns. And I'll tell you, they had two chants going. And one of them was the NRA is not the PTA. And the other one was, we don't need prayer, we need action. And I thought to myself, what does that have to do with the Parkland students that were brutally murdered? And I was asking some of the students about that, and I said, hey, so when are we going to talk about Parkland here? And they were like deers in the head, with their eyes in the headlights. They didn't know what to say. I'll tell you what happened at the very, very end. Number one, I was bullied by actual teachers there.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Because I had my sign out. They actually were talking about Martin Luther King on the news to advertise for this protest, and I thought, how ironic. I mean, Martin Luther King was totally abused by the left, and so I had a banner made myself that showcased that the Democratic Party actually opposed Martin Luther King. And those teachers seen that, and they ran to me like, I don't know what, but they were blocking my sign and whatnot. And I wasn't being ugly. I was just participating just like they were.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at the very, very end, they had 3 students that had written poems in regards to Parkland. Not one of these poems were about Parkland. Mm-hmm. They were talking in disdain for our president.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And right after that, conveniently enough, the teachers went up there and they said, by the way, if you're going to be of age by the fall, we have voter registration booths and sign-ups. And I said, wow, this is a total heist.
Yeah,
a total heist.
In the interest of time, I want to give you a chance real quickly, Rebecca, because we've got less than 2 minutes, so I thought I'd just get your comments. You've seen things like this before, haven't you?
Sure. Oh, my goodness. Everything he just said, I've seen. I've seen Antifa at teacher strikes. The National Education Association just gave their highest honor, the President's Award, to Colin Kaepernick, the leader of the Take a Knee movement. Their first speaker at the NEA Rep Assembly this year was David Hogg, the young man they used to lead that whole protest. Everything Alex just shared is true. It's unsettling, and I'm very sorry you were abused by teachers. Those are not real teachers. Real loving teachers have been taken over and degraded by union forces, and real loving teachers need to stand together, but we need parents and particularly faith leaders to stand with us because we get bullied like this every single day and have been for decades. So if you'll stand with us, we have a program called Adopt a Teacher. Adopt every loving teacher you know. Stand with them. Give them my book so they can learn what's really going on, and then stand with them and help them to break free of these unions. My dream is that these unions wouldn't be in our schools anymore. The teachers can just have their locals if they want that. But no parent like Alex should be attacked by teachers, and no child should be forced to go out and protest for anything. They should be in the classroom learning how to read and write and do their mathematics. So this is just unacceptable. So I'm grateful for the call. Thank you, Alex.
Well, I'm grateful that you could join us today. Let me just mention that we have a link to forkidsincountry.org, so you can find that. And then also the Twitter and Facebook links have the number 4, but again, you can follow all of that. And the book is entitled Standing Up to Goliath, Battling State and National Teachers Unions for the Heart and Soul of Our Kids and Country. And again, like I mentioned, the website is forkidsincountry.org. And if you click on the picture of Rebecca, you can also find her link both on Twitter and Facebook. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. We're going to take a break, and when we come back tomorrow, we're going to spend some time getting into some other very important issues that you are certainly going to want to hear us address. And so as this Thanksgiving week unfolds, we wanted to educate you about some issues other than the elections that we've been talking about. So I hope you'll join us tomorrow here on Point of View. Visit the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. See you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
November is rushing by, and I'm sure your inbox, mailbox, and ears are already over capacity with screaming announcements for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. No matter how much you're planning to spend on items for your loved ones, don't forget to save something as a gift to the nation on what's come to be known as Giving Tuesday. Your support of Point of View helps unite people across this land from sea to shining sea. Yes, we face many troubling issues, and to put it mildly, we don't always agree. But Point of View believes we can disagree with respect, with honor, with patience, and a view to inform with truth that unites. You make that possible, and we urge you to give that gift to the nation through giving to Point of View. Take just a moment and give generously today at pointofview.net. or call 800-347-5151. You can wait for Giving Tuesday, but even better, get a jump and give today with a gift that will truly keep on giving. Pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.